Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back. We are on the very last session of Stabilize, and we are about to embark on the assess part of the SME sessions. My name is Louise Klaassen, and if you've not joined us before, then let me take a moment to catch you up. So the 12 SME sessions are designed to help you think through how to stabilize your small and medium business, to help you assess different options for digitizations. So if you are a non-techie and you're faced with the reality of having to think through how you bring your business into a brave new digital world, then tomorrow and Saturday certainly is for you. We are going to be talking to non-techies. You will have to bring your black turtleneck sweater so that you can channel your inner Steve Jobs. And we're going to talk to you about what platform businesses are, what digital businesses are, and how as a non-techie you can build those businesses. So this is why you need to join us tomorrow and on Saturday afternoon. Today, after the assess piece, of course, we're going to be moving through and we're going to be talking about how you pivot. So once you've been able to assess your options and imagine those new business models, the challenge becomes around how you allow this engine of yours, the ship of yours, if you like, to slowly make the turn as well. And that's what we're going to help you think through in those 3 sessions before we finally talk about growing and looking back to our own soil, South African soil, African soil, and look at the digital businesses that already exist here, how they grow, what nurtures them, and the grit that we have as Africans and South Africans that allow us to do just that. Speaking of which, we have 2 rather extraordinary South Africans with us today, who is going to guide you through a conversation on cash flow, different scenarios, different survival strategies, different options. We have with us Leron Pryor, we have with us Desmond Thomas. They are both CAs. They both left corporate behind them to become entrepreneurs as well. So they have experienced, I think, a lot of the pain that you've gone through yourselves. I think they are experiencing a lot of the pain that you are going through yourselves at the moment. So they speak from the trenches. They've been keeping a close eye on what's been happening in our broader context too. So I think you're in exceptionally safe hands today. They both happen to be Henley alumni too. That is just an extra bonus. So Leron and Desmond, it is such a joy to welcome you to our session today. I hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Louise.
Thank you, Louise. And good afternoon, everyone. That was such a fond introduction there, Louise. Thank you very much. I don't know how much we can add to that, after all of that. But thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Just to add on to Louise's introduction, we are from a company called Interscope Advisory. And as he mentioned, the corporate background that we do have, but at the same time, we basically left it behind to jump into the entrepreneurial side of things, like most of you have. And we cover a broad range of industries: security, manufacturing, retail, mining, and recently, interestingly enough, delving into consulting in the cannabis industry, which comes with its own unique nuances. Our objective today is obviously to cover, the cash flow, survival strategies, and scenarios in South Africa. I can just share our deck with you. Just quickly okay, just 1 second for me. So in terms of framework, we'll be looking at the respective scenarios at play, the survival strategies that we can rely on with relevant levers accompanying them, and at the same time, the ethical considerations, during these unprecedented times. And then at the end, additional Q&A But as Louise said, it's more conversation, and which is obviously to have a conversation, it's two-way. So we'll take you through the various content and scenarios, but we would like to have it a two-way input as well. And at various prompts, we'll take some comments, some questions for us to have a general conversation and discussion. There we are again, Desmond and myself, just cementing the introduction. And yeah, Desmond, if you can jump into these the relevant importance or how things have shifted in 2020.
Sure. Thanks so much, Laurent. I'm glad you used pictures pre-lockdown, because right now, if you look at how I'm missing my barber, shaving is quite dropped off in March. Anyway, so I mean, COVID-19 is proven to be a real life economics lesson. I think macroeconomics, microeconomics, globalization, GDP, fiscal deficits and surpluses, socialism, capitalism, communism. I can go on. And all these things that we crammed in varsity, right, is right now playing itself out in real life. I mean, a black swan event, I heard the term for the first time in the year 2001 when I was in varsity. And at the time, I never thought I'd live through it. And now I'm currently living through my second. The only difference is right now, COVID-19 is making the 2008 financial crisis look like a holiday, if I'm being honest. So what's the impact on SMEs cash flow, right? The survival, cash flow and its consequent survival is massive, right? I foresee so many going concern paragraphs in the next few months, right? Audit programs are going to have to be changed for the risk that we never foresaw. Audit reports that were signed off January, February, I believe would have to be retracted and reissued. And the going consumptions going around and that were done in the last few months are just not worth the paper that they were written on anymore. Any businesses, cash generating units or assets that have been valued, the assumptions don't make sense and those valuations are worthless. Cash flow forecasts and budgets that were signed off in January and February by small or big businesses currently don't make sense. So where does that leave us? Right? It leaves us at a point where we're all looking to trends. We got to look at what trends are out there. How do we generate cash flow when the trends are going completely against what we're doing? And I just want to recap on trends that are currently being accelerated under COVID-19. And these are not new trends, but they're being accelerated because we have to. We don't have a choice anymore. So a cashless society, virtual learning, Henley. Focus on nutrition and health. It's been coming, it's now accelerated. Remote working, right? Digitized business, democratization of innovation, cloud storage, cybersecurity. When there's a rise in internet usage, you have a rise in cybercrime. That's just standard, right? Personal branding and localization of business, specializing on food security and manufacturing, because we've suddenly realized that we've got to become self-sufficient. But over and above these trends, one of the biggest trends that we've seen is an atmosphere of anxiety, like immediately after a terrorist attack. Right? There's anxiety all around. And the point of today is to try and address some of that anxiety, to let you know, firstly, you're not alone. We are surrounded by SMEs, small businesses or business owners, and we're going to address this together. So what's the reason for these terrorist attack-like feelings? Right? There's businesses that are guaranteed to lose in this situation, and there's potential winners. Right now, what springs to mind when I look at this graph right now, automotive industry. The latter half of last year, BMW committed 6 billion to the Roslyn plant. When you look at how the business model of automotives has changed around the world, some of them actually making ventilators, it brings to mind is the better use to the 6 billion. You look at financial services, a business like RCS who purchased Edcon's data book in January, took it over in January and where we currently are, right? You look at medical supply services, the fact that almost every SME I know is actually dabbling in that field right now to be a potential winner. So I want to pause right now and I want to ask you to walk this journey with us. And if you look at this, to try and plot your personal business on this graph and see where you are. Where do you feel? Are you a potential loser? Are you pivoting to become a potential winner within the COVID-19 context? And I'll give you a minute just to plot that down.
Okay, so whilst that's obviously happening in the background as you're plotting yourself on that grid. Main two categories, like Desmond said, is potential winner and how you're sort of pivoting into that, or in which, on the left-hand quadrant where you're sitting at the moment, and like I said, how are you pivoting to the other side? I want us to chat about a few scenarios playing out at the moment. And these are tangible, real scenarios at the moment, which we experience as entrepreneurs, we're experiencing ourselves. Where the landlord is taking a hard stance on rental collection, there's little empathy with respect to the hardship going on, because the landlord will tell you that he also owes the bank, the property is bonded. There's obviously empathy for the employees going around because the businesses are shut down, employees can't come to work, obviously unless you're essential service. But generally, there's an issue with regards to cash flow. How are the employees going to survive during this period? Creditors are calling. Everyone is in a crunch. Everyone wants their money. Everyone wants to prop up their cash flows. There's loan obligations that are due, that are overdue as a result of the snowball effect. And by now, you've already tapped into your resources, if you had, and you're already plotting how long is this going to last me? How long? What's my roadmap? When do I run out of reserves, essentially? Mainly due to there's either a partial or no top line at all, which has the snowball effect in terms of suppressing your operational cash flows to meet your respective obligations. So other scenarios playing out at the moment is more by circumstance than by design. The online space or online capability has moved at least 3 years forward. If you take Henley as an example, yes, virtual classes and lessons were spoken about, and it is in the strategy pack, but at the drop of a hat, it had to be turned on, had to be agile enough to respond to it. And it's part of the reason why we can do this virtually today. You also have older versus newer businesses, which, your newer businesses are more agile with respect to taking the new norms into account, where your older behemoths are not necessarily able to respond as quickly to the current scenarios and events. You will take for Woolworths, the Woolworths versus Edcon scenario playing out at the moment. Yes, Woolworths has the food offering, so they have been trading, but then they've also added the drive-through option, just in terms of a bit of agility. The other day I saw them advertise some winter clothing, winter attire through their online retail stores, where you ask yourself, for example, Edcon, when the baby clothes became an essential item, how were the two retailers responding to the different relaxation in regulations? We have added an article. This deck will be shared post the session. An article for you just to read through in terms of the agility and ability to respond through these unprecedented times. One thing we have to look at is, yes, we are here where we are at the moment, but this won't last forever, essentially. We don't know what the true runway of this is, but it won't last forever. But it brings us to the point with respect to what happens beyond COVID. And what are the changes, what's happening, and how are things gearing up to cater for the new normal, if you want to call it that. One thing we've picked up, or a few things, that we've picked up is that there's a shift in supply chain. There's reorientation activity happening there, where you have a scenario where, it may be a cliche saying that local is lacquer, but, with respect to local manufacturing, that is becoming so topical. You know, given our reliance on imports, you know, and the impact that the shut on borders, etc., has had, that local is lacquer is back in flavor. It's in vogue, and how are we then gearing up to take advantage of this? Shift in the single supplier or hand supplier focus, because many businesses have now obviously burnt their fingers. If you're reliant on a single supplier or just a cluster of suppliers, you know, if they are experiencing difficulties, obviously so are you. With respect to technology, the innovation around that, like I said, online capability has moved forward 3 years. You know, more rapid technology will be adopted. And how are we gearing up? How are we responding to that? Or how will you be able to pivot into that? We look at the social safety net, where companies are expected to do more, to give more, because that's also becoming the new normal. It's not just about, you know, sort of, you know, profit taking, but more about how do we share. And then also then the consumer psychology. How's the consumer's mindset changed during this time with respect to what are the new true needs of the consumers, and how does that consumer perceive value with respect to obviously the new way of doing things and the new normal. So having had the look at the different scenarios, I'd like us to pause here and just obviously through our interactive channel, just some comments, some questions, you know, with respect to the current true reality that you are experiencing as an SMME, and then also with the sort of one lens on beyond COVID, where do you think you maybe also be able to position yourself and your business, you know, as sort of the COVID runway clears up? Louise, happy to you know, sort of have you facilitate any sort of Q&A or comments that has come through from the floor.
Thanks so much, Laurent, and thanks, Des. Let's take a pause. Let's get some interaction going. I would encourage everybody to use the Q&A facility. You will see the button at the bottom of your screen to share some thoughts on some of the scenarios that resonate with you or that does not. Just right at the beginning, right at the off, Albert Africa says, can you please explain the spike in alcohol with reference to your second slide?
So basically, sorry, I was looking at the questions, and Louise, I've been answering questions as we go. The spike is about demand. Yes, the supply is being cut off, but there's absolutely a demand out there, and it's a challenge we've got to look at, because now we know what happens when there's a demand for something and it's been made illegal. It opens up the black market, which is a fact. It's there, it's happening, and it is a massive challenge for us under these conditions. Look, I think whether we disagree with the lockdown in terms of the banning of alcohol and cigarettes or not, what I am saying is that the unintended consequence is that the black market's been opened and it's thriving.
Interesting. Grace asks, how do you make money online if so many existing companies are already doing webinars, training, etc. for free? And how do SMMEs compete with this? This is such an interesting question, because we have these Zoom screens, Zoom in this particular case, in front of us, and we spend a lot of time here at the moment. How do we compete for the share of mind, so to speak, James?
If I can take that, Louise, it all comes down to value. Not all businesses will be able to operate in an online space. So you have to overlay your product. What is your offering? How does your customer perceive your product? Of what value is your product to the customer? Do you have a walk-in store retail where the customer has to come in and touch and feel before they make the purchase? Or is it generic enough where the customer, if they just have to identify with your brand, they would buy your product anywhere? You know, so you can fit into any sort of supply chain plug-in. So it's not a blanket online webinar approach to the point with respect to everyone's doing webinar. It's all about what is my service, what is my offering, and can I then pivot it to be an online offering? I think that's more the question that has to be answered in terms of that value around my offering versus what the competition is doing and what everyone else is doing. It's really just about my product, and if it is now that you can package it into online, there are then various sort of options on the table as to how do I then now pivot that and get it out there.
Thank you very much. Mohammed Abdullah says that large international suppliers are hamstrung, thus limiting products to larger retailers. So what can large businesses do to support South African SMEs to scale up, to get products into our retail stores?
Yeah, so I think that the opportunity has always been there. It's been here. I mean, for the last 4 or 5 years, it's been talked about a lot. And I like to parallel it with where we were as a business school, as Hindi, where we had been talking for quite a few years about how do we pivot into the digital space to be able to offer online courses. But COVID-19 forced us into a position where we were not able to talk about it anymore and had to do. And I think that's where retailers or big South African business is now. It's time to do. We can't keep talking about it. We've signed master plans. We've discussed things about boosting local production capacity. But now we have to do. The rubber has to hit the road. We've seen when supply stopped in China, stores' shelves went empty. So we're asking ourselves, how sustainable are we? And I want to refer to some of the good news stories that have come out. I mean, you've got entrepreneurs who developed a test kit, right? A brand new test kit. That is the local capability. We've seen guys starting to build ventilators. So we do have the capability, and it's about these businesses actually putting their money where their mouth is and taking guys on the road. I mean, I for one have dealt many times with enterprise development programs that are honestly a tick box exercise, and we've got to move away from that. So I think it's a very great point from the question, and I think it's about local big business taking it seriously and taking us on this journey that we keep talking about and do.
Thank you very much. There are such interesting conversation points coming through, I think, on our Q&A. I would encourage everybody to continue to add to this, and whatever we don't get to here, we'll try and pick up in a Q&A afterwards, and certainly towards the latter part of the afternoon as well. I think what I'm going to do is hand over to Des, to yourself and to Laurent, so that we continue, and then we'll come back and recap some of these questions.
Okay. Thanks, Louise. Yeah, fair that we recap at the next interval or the next juncture. I think what's of importance now is just to look at all the, the survival strategies out there. What levers are available to us to allay a bit of the anxiety and to have us put a plan together, in terms of obviously treading water through this time. So as you would have known, there was quite a bit of publication out there with respect to the various options on the table, funding options, relief options through this period. And we just took the liberty of summarizing a few of the options out there, just again, obviously to spark the conversation. But what we've also done in the background is we've loaded it on the microsite, on the SME microsite, and that goes into much more detail per fund and per the opportunity on the table. So don't be too sort of taken off that this is summarized and how do I get all of this. On the microsite, you have all the detail to peruse, number one, and then definitely number two, get more, if you request more detail, Desmond and I can definitely also take you on the journey or assist you, where you're struggling with the relevant platforms out there. So there's been various communication around funds and opportunities, starting with Department of Agriculture, looking at grants, tourism, also looking at grants capped at 50,000. We've got the property industry group, which is now retail specific, which you apply via your landlord. The one on the major banks is a bit unclear as the details are evolving, but that was as a result of the 500 billion rand socio and economic relief that was announced the other day by our number one. And the details will crystallize as as we get more information effectively as to how the banks may administer access to that specifically. You have the NEF, Black Business Fund, which is looking at medical products specifically, manufacturing of medical products to respond to the medical profession and the testing immediately. You have the South African Futures Trust, which is also known as the Oppenheimer Family Fund, that is administered through the major banks, just by virtue of they felt it's more efficient to do it that way. You have SARS that has many mechanisms at play at the moment to ease the runway, the cash flow runway, if you want to call it that, where and when SARS obligations become due, they've deferred in instances what you can do or how you can reduce your SARS exposure. It may sound, the SARS specifically can get quite technical. So that is where, where your accountant or we can assist would need to come in, because you need to break it down really sort of opportunity, if you want to call it that, because you have employee incentive tax, you have provisional tax, there's additional support, just so that that you don't miss all the buckets with respect to how SARS can assist. And the SARS assistance is more on a delay of the immediate outflow, which it may not help. It actually, let me put it to you this way, it keeps money in the business, essentially, without you now having to pay your full obligation at this point in time. So that was quite a nifty way of assistance as well, but it does get quite intricate, and you may be leaving opportunities on the table if it's not, sort of meticulously scrutinized. You have the SMME fund, which is quite broad with respect to, the respective industries and what you can apply for. There's a mixture there in terms of, companies that can manufacture items that's immediately required, or a general sort of debt relief or COVID relief that companies do require. The details also is, there's a website, with respect of application forms and which category you fit in for assistance. Sukuma Relief Program, this was the Rupert Fund. It's unfortunately closed to new applicants at the moment as it was oversubscribed, just when it opened. We don't know what the developments will be out there, because they were also in the background sourcing some more capital in the fund. You have the UIF, which is mainly employee focused, and hopefully we sort of crossing fingers that they sort out the processing issues in the background to ensure that all the applications are processed and paid out faster, to provide a necessary injection for for employees. An interesting one I came across was Vodacom, the Voda Lend. This is more in the general category. They're also in the category with the Outsurance and the Santams of the world. But there's more general, general category in terms of businesses needing some form of assistance. Where, for example, the Outsurance is specifically for if you're doing work in the insurance industry and you may have, for example, purchase orders that you needed to action, or you just experience a downturn as a result of obviously COVID in that space. There's some benefits under that general category that you can tap into as well. Like I said, don't feel too overwhelmed, with respect to just having seen this on a slide. It is further detail is within the microsite, like I said, which is quite a bit more detail per fund, the scope that it has, relevant terms, and what the platforms are. So here, Louise, again, the objective here is just to understand from the floor, how have they experienced, because some people may have tapped into this already. I know the UIF would probably come first to mind. How have people experienced, the ability to apply the ease of doing it? Have some had success? Are they in the queue? You know, just a general feel for what's been happening out there.
Thanks so much, Laurent. There's lots of fantastic information in there. I saw a comment from somebody who said that their employees got paid out, and I am looking for that comment, and I'll find it just now, because I think that must be an enormous relief and shout out. So, but perhaps one of the other thoughts here from Shirley, I've tried the UIF option, however, no communication from the UIF. I think there's that element of frustration. What are your thoughts on, and Amanda Bester says, oh gosh, the most unuser-friendly process ever, UIF, and then submitting to the SMME fund. What are your suggestions to people in engaging with these processes, and the, let's call it the mindset to adopt at this particular point in time?
Yeah, so I'll take that one, Louise. I think I agree that the process is not great, and not to advertise our services at all, but as a firm, when all these came up, we spent hours and hours just making sure we understand exactly what's needed. If you think about the UIF process, you need to convert your file to a certain format. There's very specific things that needs to be done, and if you don't do it in that manner, it just delays the process. So the one thing I can say, it is difficult. Your last choice, because at this point, you know, without killing our business, I would say SMEs needs to save money. So the first point of call is to try and do it yourself. But in order to do it yourself, you really need to get into a quiet room, spend some time and unpacking exactly what the requirements are and how they need to be submitted. If you really feel that that's beyond you, then I would advise to sort of get people in. There's quite a few people offering their services, but first point of call in this current climate is to save as much money as possible. But I do agree with the comments, it is not user-friendly, most points. There are a few that I found easier than others, but the general consensus, most are just not user-friendly.
Thank you. Kabelo Huma says that he's a farmer and that he has since applied and is now waiting, has not yet received the response. Dirk is also saying that they've applied to several but have not yet received a response. So there seems to be a general frustration in just getting the wheels to turn, and some dissonance between the sense that 1.6 billion has been paid out, but who has received that money? And how do we actually get that back into our economy to get the wheels turning? So what can you do to access funds if the company is active for 2 months, has only been active for 2 months and hasn't registered yet for pay as you earn or UIF? This is a tricky situation, right? This is from Joan John.
That's correct, Louise. Unfortunately, I mean, the criteria that the funds have is quite clear as a minimum threshold. From what I've seen, they want you to be as a minimum in business for 12 months. That's the first thing. And then second, you have to be compliant, tax compliant, SARS compliant. And UIF, there's a bit of leeway where they may allow you to register retrospectively. But there's definitely the 12-month threshold, a trading scenario, and the tax compliance as a minimum with respect to what I've personally seen from applying and collating all of this information.
Thanks so much, James. I think we'll keep those questions for now. I'll allow you to continue with your presentation, and then we'll pick up more questions later on.
Thank you, Louise.
Thanks, Louise. Right, so we've things that could be applied for, but then enough, you know, rule of thumb says generally you should have some cash reserves in your business to cover 3 months of working capital. Now we know realistically, as SMMEs, it generally doesn't happen. But let's say that you are fortunate enough and there's some cash reserves. So ask yourself a few questions. Have I drawn up a cash flow budget, right? Have I worked out what that budget is, considering how everything has changed? Your revenues are definitely not going to be the same. Your expenses can't be the same, right? And is that budget a live budget that's going to live and breathe? Are you going to live by it? How much money do you need to survive, and how much are these reserves? So you've looked at it, you've pulled up your budget, and you're forecasting for the, let's call it 18 months. You know, you've said maybe for your personal belief is that a vaccination will be available in 18 months. So you try and work out how you can tread water and sort of pivot into different fields. But now you're looking at cost cutting. So what can you remove, right? Travel is a big one that's been spoken about. We're currently discovering in the world that we can work from our offices, from our homes, sorry. I mean, us as Interscope at the moment is considering closing our office. Initially, we got an office because we said, you know, three young black guys running an accounting and consulting service working from home does not look professional. Currently, we're pivoting into a world where you're saying everybody has adapted. Now we can have that Skype meeting without compromising our professionalism, right? And then which cost has then there's the uptick in data. And one of the key ones that we haven't got on the slide, and it's a very topical one, is advertising. The way you advertise has to change. Think about billboards, right? Think about lamppost advertising. But I want to caveat that by saying that you can't just cut your marketing budget right now, because let's realize that our markets are going to contract. Whoever you're selling to is going to contract. And when markets contract, we are fighting for the same market share. So advertising is a tricky one, and I would absolutely say where there is cash, where there is funds available, direct it into marketing and be the supplier of choice. Because at this time, we've got to realize that our markets are going to shrink, right? And then optimizing revenue. If you've got a large scale of products, which of those products in the highest demands? Where are you getting your best margins? Which are your nice to have? Who's your loss leaders? Understand those revenues, the products or services that you're selling, and make sure that you're cross-selling and upselling opportunities as much as possible. Because remember, cash flow is a bucket, and right now the tap has either been shut altogether or it has slowed down. And it's up to you to understand that we can't just advocate your cash flow for this lockdown period. We've got to be looking at post. So yes, fine and well, everybody's telling you, look at the trends, pivot your business. But how do you pivot when your business doesn't survive? And that's what it's about. So in this period of downturn, it's about finding that revenue stream, optimizing your products and services, and making sure that you can make it through this period. Laurent, next slide.
Yeah, sorry, Desmond, I was just answering a live question here.
Then there's a favorite one. There's a company that I came across called Siyabonga. Also an SMME, and these entrepreneurs are allowing small businesses to actually sell discounted vouchers right now to generate some kind of cash flow in the business that you can redeem in future. So for example, if your barber, and again, I really miss my barber, if your barber goes on, puts on a voucher, if you usually pay 100 Rand for a voucher, he could then put it on now and sell it to you for 70 Rand, and you could redeem it once it's possible, right? So that's a fantastic way if you have a business that can work in that kind of manner to sort of just generate some kind of cash flow to keep you going. The next one is engaging suppliers, employees, banks, advisors, just to talk about it. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make as SMMEs is when the going gets tough, we tend to hide. And there's a fear of sitting down and having these difficult conversations, right? We've got to have these difficult conversations, be it the bank, be it to your employees, be it to suppliers, and not necessarily getting rid of employees, but asking them to go through the journey, possibly working for less and get it back in a different manner, working on profit share models, but have these effective, difficult conversations now. Because the longer you leave it to fester, number one, losing suppliers right now at this stage is a reality for everyone. And can your business survive losing its key suppliers? And then losing your talent, because that's who your employees are. That's your talent. And you're going to lose them if you do not sit down with them and make them understand the full spectrum of what's currently happening. I think as small businesses, we assume all our employees are aware of what's going on, but that's not always the case. And then the last one, which is my personal favorite, is just your business continuity plan. As small businesses, again, there's a lot of talk. We don't document our thoughts. We don't plan. We're not looking to say, what am I going to do to tread water? And how am I going to redesign my business to come out of it? Sit down with that plan. Understand what it means for your business and the implications. Set milestones so that you're able to keep yourself honest, right? And live and breathe towards that plan, because all these things that we know we should be doing, because we've never been smacked in the face like this before, it hasn't happened recently, we sort of put it on shelf if. And it's about time we kind of go back to basics and say, the basics that I've been told is have a cash flow forecast, budget, have a continuity plan. What are my drivers? What are the influences on these things? So for me personally, those are the sort of the internal things that we can look at in terms of treading the water over this time.
Okay, just with respect to the ethical considerations in these times, you know, it feels like it's also such an opportune time to suddenly, you know, lose your internal integrity, you know, just by virtue of all of the moving parts at the moment, and you can always blame it on, you know, something else. You know, you quickly draw the parallels in terms of the United States and the whole situation with the World Health Organization, you know, in this time of crisis. You know, Martin Luther King says that, you know, the time is always right to do what is right. So with all the moving parts, it does not necessarily mean that you should lose that inner compass and that inner integrity to just do what's right. You know, a few things come to mind at play at the moment is, you know, how prices have been inflated with respect to hand sanitizers and you know, all these essentials. And this was the opportune time to just bank quickly, you know, in terms of humanitarian crisis, the pandemic, but, you know, let's quickly inflate, you know, the recommended prices for these items. And then second to that is, you know, you feel for the employees at this point in time, with respect to businesses having to close the doors during this period or partial operating hours, and what's going to happen post-COVID, you know, so there's that anxiety from the floor, the shop floor level. And it's easy just to, you know, sort of tinker on reduced staff payments, and you may have reserves, or you can do the UIF application, but you're not doing it, you know, those type of things. It's almost, it's not the time, let me put it to you that way, to not do the ethical thing. We just felt that this is something that, as much as we spoke about all the financial levers and the scenario, the survival levers, that we shouldn't forget about, like I said, that inner compass and our inner ethics that steers us or guides us. So that is the end of our cash flow, you know, presentation with respect to content-wise. We are available on the following details for any of the participants that, you know, want to reach out to us for any sort of further insights, discussions, etc. You know, so from a formality point of view, Louise, it's the end of our presentation from that point of view, but definitely happy to field any sort of questions, etc. that you may deem necessary.
Thank you so much, Laurent. Thank you so much, Des. Laurent, if I can ask you to please close your presentation on that side for us, then we can get both of you on screen and we can get into some gritty conversation, because there are some very real questions here that we need to discuss. Thank you, everybody. So I think there's an encouragement here from Yvette Govender that says, absolutely, as a marketing consultant, I encourage every business to please make every effort to keep communicating and advertising. If you are not doing it, then your customers will either go to a competitor, especially now. They may not assume that you have survived this period. So, and I guess if that the kind of thing that we communicate, the message, the tone would be slightly different from what we might usually do. But thank you for that encouragement. One of our anonymous attendees says that my company has been fortunate enough to not need any funding to this point, but I am worried that once I am in trouble, there won't be anything left. I've already cut expenses to the bare minimum and managed to keep one staff member employed by taking a personal pay cut, but I am afraid that my good fortune will run out if the lockdown continues for another month. This is a very real concern. What are your suggestions?
Yeah. So if I can take that, Louise, absolutely, and grateful that your company has the reserves to sustain, for a period. For you to at least obviously honor, obligations and staff obligations at that, which is quite commendable and fantastic. My suggestion would be, though, that all businesses have experienced a downturn as a result of obviously the COVID pandemic. And my suggestion would be not to, or let me rephrase that, to actually still take advantage and apply for the opportunities out there by demonstrating the downturn your business has experienced with respect to new cash flow or operational cash flow from business as usual taking place. So I would still suggest that you do apply to these funds, and not only rely on, and like you said, your anxiety comes from the fact that your reserves will run out soon. So my suggestion would be to still apply and to obviously demonstrate what the impact of COVID has been on your existing operational status.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Laurent, it speaks to the internal mechanisms I was talking about. So currently you need to look at your cash flow forecast with your reserves. And I would plot two scenarios, one that's quite optimistic and one that takes it down to the bare bones. And if after that you still feel that absolutely there's a possibility that you're going to run out of money, then that's the point that triggers you applying for those funds, because you can't look at it at the short term. I think everybody's waiting for 7 p.m. tonight to hear the president's address, but the end of lockdown does not equal the end of COVID-19. This is our new world, new reality, and we've got to be planning for that. So if you are planning for the next month or 6 weeks, then you're in trouble. And I say that with all the respect in the world. We've got to be planning scenarios for the next 3 to 4 months as a minimum, and that's like the bare minimum. But to be honest with you, it really is difficult now. So that's what I was talking about, that live budget. So I would plot my next 18 months, but keep it live, updating it daily if possible. Every time the president has an address, I would update it again. It's that kind of live reality we've got to be working on.
Thank you very much. And it is that urgent. So not just how do we survive, but in fact, how do we start to change? How do we start to pivot? This is some of what we're going to be looking at over the next 3 days, everybody. I would like to know, quite a few people talked about travel and the travel industry and looking at possibilities around the travel industry. And I think if we are in travel right now, if you're in tourism right now, the world really literally is shifting underneath your feet. I'm directing this question to you. So how do you see the travel scenario play out? There are various elements here. There's the structural element. One of our participants noted the fact that, we are seeing airlines disappear right now. So there is that particular element. There's the fact that we are all in lockdown right now, which means that as soon as restrictions start to lift, we're likely to see a surge in demand. How would you suggest people play the ball on this particular one in that particular industry and game?
Sure. Can I sign a disclaimer before answering this one? Look, I love Clem Sunter, and Clem Sunter is a scenario planner, and I recently read a few things that he wrote. But yeah, there's so many scenarios that could pan out over COVID-19, and we've got to look at what are these possible scenarios. If the borders are opened yet social distancing is encouraged, we might be able to travel again, but people might not be willing to travel as much as they used to for the fear of contracting the virus. So until such a certain point that we have some kind of semblance of certainty, the travel and tourism industry is one that it's really, I wish I had a crystal ball here, because you would position yourself perfectly well to take advantage. I think I answered a question just directly to somebody online, where I said, I would look at the voucher option and make that option open-ended. But the difficulty therein is you can't predict how much it's going to cost you as well. So it's such a difficult thing to pivot. So Louise, I'm glad you chose me for this very difficult question. But the travel industry, for me, it just depends on those scenarios. You know, when will we be able to travel? How will travel continue? How will countries start interacting with each other again? And these are, right now, the uncertainty continues, because we can flatten the curve. You still haven't got rid of the disease. It's still there. You know? So flattening the curve and uplifting lockdowns is not going to solve a travel issue. So very difficult.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Really, really interesting and really tricky. Laurent, perhaps I can direct my following question, the next question to you. Quite a few people in our forum today commented on our local manufacturing capability and capacity that really has been eroded over time. And now that we're looking at this local is lekker scenario, how much do we really have to look at? We're talking about the steel industry, we're talking about the retail industry, perhaps some other aspects of our manufacturing industries. What do you see? What are the opportunities, and how can people perhaps move quickly now that we are in this very interesting situation?
Thanks, Louise. So we have to look at it in sort of few buckets. You know, I saw the question earlier also about the steel industry. You know, we have to overlay it with the investment behind it, or the capital. I mean, manufacturing by its nature is very capital intensive, you know, with respect to the investment before you see your returns. So you have to ask yourself, in terms of the quick wins, which are the quick sort of, and I use the term quick wins loosely, because I'm leveraging it or pinpointing it to the steel industry, which I mean, it took years to build, and you know, sort of the whole ecosystem around the steel industry in itself. But then I look at, you know, for example, the ability in the medical space to manufacture hand sanitizer. It's an example in terms of, you know, that local manufacture ingredients, you know, to service the current demand and spike in demand and the demand to come, basically. So when we say manufacturing industry and pivoting that industry, it is about what are the quick wins, what are the low hanging, high volume areas that we can tap into with respect to local manufacture that will, you know, that will yield by basically that 80-20 principle, in terms of the 20% of focus that will yield that 80% of returns, especially in these times where capital will be sort of turned over or looked at through a second lens with the scarce capital. Where do we actually invest it in? So, you know, if I were your business, Desmond did mention in terms of how certain businesses transformed into manufacturing the respiration machines. That was a quick, you know, pivot in terms of we're doing this, and we can quickly now transform to do the following. It's these type of short-term, you know, that short-term roadmap, those are the focuses that we should look at. And then longer term, we can eventually look at, you know, what are the more capital intensive manufacturing items that will become the new norm, where we won't rely on all the imports anymore.
Thank you. And perhaps with that, some thoughts from yourselves based on a question from Albert. What are the policy changes that we perhaps should see that could help encourage growth?
Policy changes in terms of government?
Yep.
Yeah, I think, you know, one thing that absolutely appreciate and constantly speak to people about in conversations is that South African government has a lot of good intentions, and there's a lot of things around. You know, you've got black industrialist programs, you've got a lot of intent in terms of stimulating manufacturing, because it's not because of COVID-19 that we know that we need to stimulate manufacturing. I mean, you take the textile industry that used to employ over 300,000 people less than 20 years ago, and today we're sitting under 90,000 after the borders opened. So we were aware that in terms of job creation, manufacturing was the place to be. So these documents live and breathe out there, but implementation has never been our strong point. And I say that with all the respect in the world. You've got good news stories out there of things that have been fantastic, and we've got horror stories when you look at the farming incident in the Free State, not to go down that road, but we've got all these funds missing hands, and it's time to take on the mantle, you know, and without being philosophical, but it's time for Tumamina. It's time for people to actually look at this. It's a war. We are at a war, and the war is against this virus. And currently we've gone and got funds. We've gone and stimulated the economy with packages and relief packages. And the question is, what happens next? Is it business as usual when we get some semblance of normalcy? Or do we actually go and implement these policies, which on paper, when you actually sit down with them, they're actually really phenomenal. But are we going to carry on implementing as we used to? And it's time for that mind shift to change. I mean, just a simple example, you look at these relief funds, and I absolutely agree with a lot of the comments that it is not user-friendly. And just talking about the one that's oversubscribed, being run by business partners, it was actually quite easy to do. So is it time for us to partner with companies like business partners and say, we actually want to build factories at this rate? And can you assist us to implement as efficiently as you've done so? That's why they knew they were oversubscribed immediately. People are very critical of that fund that says, gee, was it just opened and it was oversubscribed. The reason it was oversubscribed was that it was so user-friendly to apply. And that is where we need to get to as government, or all these, you know, all the different funds that we are trying to implement this new interest in manufacturing. And my second point goes around, we can't hide behind the fact that our labor rates are expensive. I acknowledge the fact South African labor rates are equivalent to those of Turkey the last time I checked. And we know that and understand that. But we can't talk about 4IR on one hand and manufacturing on the other. These things need to talk to each other. So let's see how, with our high labor rate, we can implement the technology that's out there, reduce cost, and become a competitor. Let's become a net exporter. Let's look at African markets. How do we, as Africa, become that vertical supply chain? We don't necessarily have to export to Europe alone. And that, for me, is the next wave. That's the smack in the face that Africa needed, right? Let's look at that.
Yeah, just one bias comment from my side in terms of policy changes. It would be a nudge, you know, to open or deregulate the cannabis industry. You know, that would be for me a nudge and an immediate quick win, low-hanging fruit policy change.
Thank you, Laurent. I was waiting for somebody to ask what was happening in that video behind you. I don't know if any of you saw the marketing video beforehand. And there's certainly, you touch on a topic that's very near and very dear to my own heart. So thank you very much for that response. I want to bring two questions together here. The one is from Becky Dube. Becky is the owner of Curiosity Backpackers in Joburg, in Maboneng, and then also in Durban, and then he opened in Cape Town last year. So a phenomenal young entrepreneur, I think a true shining light of South African leadership, but of course in a really tough situation right now. And he says, if you were a tourism business that owns and rents property, what is the opportunity that you would use at the moment, or how would you pivot your model post-lockdown at this particular point? And I want to try perhaps and link it in with a different question as well. Let me just quickly see. That takes a slightly different perspective, and it's one by John Witter. He says, If one has been in an industry which now looks like a dead end post-COVID lockdown, i.e. hospitality, event management, tourism, automotive repairs, though I don't know about that, should one wait and see how things happen or roll out post-lockdown, or should one cut one's losses and get out sooner rather than later? And these two questions, one, how do we pivot? How could one pivot? What are the possibilities?
Mm-hmm.
The other, facing that question about, do I close my business? I think is succinctly brought together by Leanne, that then says, how do I know what the break point is? How do I know that I am facing this decision point and how to make that decision? This is tough, right?
Yeah. Absolutely, very tough there, Louise. I mean, we're obviously going to bounce this answer around. I think the first part is to make any informed decision. We've just referred to that live budget or the cash flow. With respect to you need to understand, you know, how far your runway is just from physical cash, let alone the business idea, but just your physical cash in terms of, you know, when is that cliff or the dead end, effectively. We did say it needs to be live and shift. You know, it can't be, you know, something that you worked on, you know, basically virtually a month, with all due respect, but a month ago, and your runway is out now, for example, at the end of April. You know, it's just about these live realities. For example, your runway is now out at the end of April, but you know that there may be a bank guaranteed or treasury guaranteed loan that the banks may administer. You know, there's so many fluid circumstances that you continue to have to plug in. So that at least arms you with the facts, with respect to cash flow facts and what is happening. So that's the first part on my side. And then the second part is there should be an assessment of, there's the new normal obviously coming. I mean, COVID is not going to last forever. It's hitting us hard, and it has a deep sort of, left a deep gash, if you can call it that. But there's also the new normal that is coming. So you also have to just overlay, without looking into a crystal, through a crystal ball, but there is a new normal that's coming as well. And what are those pivot opportunities before using some strong language that says, you know, you're calling the death knell? It's just about, you know, is there an opportunity to reinvent yourself because you're posing a different value or value proposition? So for me, those two things are important. That sort of immediately stands out for me. Because I don't know what your sort of your inputs or your views would be on that.
Yeah. I think it's a very tough one. So just hello to Becky. I haven't seen him for a while. He's a good friend. And I sympathize with you in terms of pivoting in that sector, because it is asset intensive, and you've got an asset there where value is not going to be realized in terms of revenue for a long time. And it's about taking advantage of the value of the asset while you can. It's a very difficult question. So in terms of, I mean, I think myself and Laurent have closed the business before, and I wish it's another session altogether in terms of some of the bad habits that entrepreneurs have. Because we are passionate and there's a bit of ego, you know, we try and make sure that this thing has to work. You know, we love that saying that no matter what, it will work. And there comes a point where there's a blur between what's my finances and what's the business finances. You're so in debt because you're taking out personal loans to make sure that this can survive. There's no more a distinguish between the cash flows of the business and your own cash flows. And you literally sit there, and that for me is a point where you've got to realize that you're strangling yourself and you can't think. As an entrepreneur, you cannot think when you are strangled. There's no oxygen in your brain. That debt strangles you, and you effectively become a liability to your own business. So for me, it's that point, besides all the tools we've talked about, when you're sitting there and there's a blur between the business debt and your debt, and it is all there blurred and mulled together, that's kind of the point where you know that something's gone wrong. And there's nothing wrong. You know, I thought it was the end of the world when we closed one business. There's nothing wrong with packing it up, starting over, and you're still alive. Yes, there's an element of pride, and there's an element of starting over again, and there's a big element of loss. I've been there. But you can pack it up and you can start again. It happens. It's not the end of the world.
Gosh, you make it sound doable, Des. And you also make it sound less lonely. Yeah. these are tough times for a lot of us. Lawrence Maria says, how do we professionally and persuasively tackle large clients who insist on maintaining a 30-day debt payment policy under the COVID-19 situation?
That is a pet hate. I've experienced one with one of my clients. I don't want to mention them on this platform, but I'd like to name and shame. But I think it's absolutely embarrassing if you have big businesses that are squeezing small business in this time, number one, with payment terms, or number two, squeezing their suppliers. And in my personal case, it's been a large, very large business, and not Edcon, just because of what's going on. It's definitely not Edcon, but that is not paying or paid half, part paying some of the SMEs. And for me, that's the mind shift we need to have in this country. I honestly think I mentioned it earlier in terms of how big business need to come to the party. We talk a great game and we follow the tick box so that we can get the BEE points, and I tick it off and I've done that. But is there a real will? Is the will there to, in fact, real change? If we acknowledge that SMEs effectively employ our end customers, building this ecosystem where these customers, these employees that work for this SME are actually my end customer at the end of the day. And it's that realization, that mind shift we've got to change. And the one thing, we can talk as much theory as we want. Changing mindsets is the hardest thing. And it's a challenge for me personally that I've experienced with many clients that are corporates do not have the will. They will appoint one person, and that's the transformation officer, and she has to, or he has to sit there and make sure that there's a transformation clause in every little thing. But there is no real will right up to the top at board level that says, are we doing the right thing? This is what we should be doing. So for me, it's a mindset shift. I think government, we can't always say, government can be as strict as they want, and they can keep pushing and changing policy and making laws stricter. But we know every time you change a law, there's ways to flaunt it. It's about the will to do the right thing, and we need to work on that. That for me is the more important than policy change. Sorry, Laurent, I interrupted you.
No. It's a challenge, Des. With respect to obviously the world, as you spoke about, but I mean the real scenario now is obviously that business that's experiencing all of this. Unfortunately, given the David and Goliath situation, there's not much that you can tangibly action, especially during this point in time, because all they'll tell you that it's a higher office that made this decision, and that's why we are now following through on that directive or that instruction. So my advice would be sort of already starting to work on plan B with respect to, for example, the financial levers that we spoke about, that may be available. In that you may list that, business X, Y, and Z is holding back X amount, just to demonstrate the impact, the snowball impact with respect to what you may still receive versus why you're asking or why you're in a need for an intervention, a cash flow intervention. That would most likely be my advice for your scenario or what you're experiencing at the moment.
Thank you very much. I'm going to end us off on a last question, and it is a tough question. I'm going to ask you both to keep your responses on point, so keep it tight. This is from Nadine. She says, a concern for me is that everyone is going to give discount or reduce the cost of their goods just to get their customers in a market where the industry is already not generating a big profit margin. So her concern is that this is going to destroy cash flow. And how does she compete with these new discount-minded consumers in her industry with these very thin margins already? So if you can keep it tight, if you can keep it focused, but please, some good advice for Nadine, and that will wrap out our Q&A for today.
Sorry, I just missed the part. Which industry is it?
She didn't.
Or is it just
industry?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Sure. So it's a bit of I'll take a stab at it. To your point, Louise, concise. I think there's no use in attempting to, play the game or, compete in that space for the sake of competing, but then you trading at negative margins, or, bare bone or negative margins, I would say. So I would say, again, going back to your cash flow and your life, understanding of your profitability, just understand where your threshold is. If you cannot, go be below a certain threshold, just don't do it. Because at the end of the day, you're already staring down a barrel with respect to your depressed cash flows, depressed profitability, but at the same time, just for the sake of competing, you are also reducing prices. I would say, understand where your margins are, understand what your threshold is, where you cannot go below, and that is your answer, in terms of playing at that game.
Yeah. From my side, just very concisely, if you can't compete on price, try and compete in value. I mean, we've said it many times, what's going to distinguish us from the rather bigger consulting and accounting firms is to do what they do faster and better. Simple.
So get competitive. Thank you so much. 2 comments, I think that helps to sum our session up nicely from my colleague, David McLean. He says, I've learned more from Desmond and Laurent in 15 minutes about SMEs and accessing funding available for them in South Africa than I've learned in 4 weeks wading through the morass of ambiguous information and noise on the subject. Thank you very much. And then there's a lovely quote here from Matt, who says that following what Desmond said, and I think this is beautiful, success is not final, failure is not fatal, it is the courage to continue that counts. And that is a Winston Churchill quote. So it is time to let you know what happens tomorrow. So tomorrow we have Norbert Moravich. He is one of our colleagues from the Hindi UK, from the Center of Entrepreneurship. He is Austrian, he is high energy, he is provocative, and he is going to come, perhaps not tomorrow, but perhaps the day after, with his Steve Jobs black turtleneck. But you might want to start to warm up into that turtleneck so that you can channel your inner Steve Jobs, because he is firstly going to educate you on what a platform business is and what network effects are. So if those ideas are foreign to you, it's okay. You are in good company. We're here to educate you. And then on Saturday, he's going to tell us how to build a digital technology startup if you are not a techie. So this is for you. So this is, before you decide to close those businesses down, people, come, assess your options. That is what these next 3 sessions are about. As always, so grateful to have you with us in this hour. Would like to play you out with a particular song. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to get the music up so long. All right. So today's song comes from Kenya, from Sauti Sol. It's called Kuliko Jana, and it says, Unapenda leo kuliko jana, which means in Kiswahili that you are more loved today than you were yesterday. And from us at Henley, this is true because we care about you. We've got your back. So if you happen to have one of these close by, I don't know if you can see it. I'll put it up against my black. Then I will invite you to switch your light off, get your light on, and we'll play you out.
Ananipenda leo kuliko jana, kuliko jana, kuliko jana. Yesu nipende leo kuliko jana, kuliko jana, kuliko jana. Yesu nipende leo kuliko jana. Wewe ndo nategemea. kupona baba na kutegemea. Chochote kitanikatia, kuingia mbinguni utandondolea. Wewe ndo nategemea, kupona baba na kutegemea. Chochote kitanikatia, kuingia mbinguni utandondolea.